Imagine this: a modern airliner, packed with 379 people, lands and slams directly into another plane on the runway. It explodes into a terrifying fireball. Now, by every law of probability, that should be an unsurvivable catastrophe, but it wasn't. Tonight, in this special report from the Human Error News Network, we're going to dig into the impossible story of the Haneda runway collision.
Welcome, Hen Watchdogs. You know the feeling. You've got the procedures, you've run the drills, you've got the best tech money can buy. But what happens when every single one of those layers fails at the exact same time? That's the nightmare scenario, right? A total catastrophic system collapse. Well, on January 2nd, for everyone aboard JAL 516, that nightmare became terrifyingly real.
And yet from that mangled, burning wreck of a state-of-the-art Airbus A350, every single one of the 379 souls on board got out alive. It's an outcome that just doesn't make sense.
And that's the paradox that should be keeping you up at night. Because when you unpack it, you have to ask yourself a really tough question. How would my team, my systems, perform under that kind of intense, no-win pressure? We all trust our checklists, but this incident is proof that even the most robust plans can shatter in an instant. So, let's put on our investigator hats and start where the very first crack in the system appeared.
As an inspector, you always start at the point of origin. And for this one, that takes us inside the cockpit of the Japan Coast Guard DHC-8. Remember, these guys weren't on a routine flight. They were racing to deliver critical aid after a massive earthquake. The pressure was on. Now look closely at this transcript. The instruction from air traffic control is unambiguous: taxi to holding point C5. The crew even reads it back perfectly. But then something happens. The intense focus on their emergency mission likely triggered a phenomenon we call cognitive tunneling. It's where you're so focused on one goal, you literally don't process other critical information. They heard the words, but their mission-driven brain interpreted it as clearance to enter the runway, and in 23 seconds of silence, they rolled past the hold line.
But we know a disaster like this is never just one single error. That's lesson 101. So let's move to the next layer of the defense, the air traffic control tower. This is where a piece of technology was supposed to be the failsafe.
And here's the thing. Haneda Airport had a system designed for this exact situation, a runway occupancy monitor. And guess what? It works perfectly. It saw the Coast Guard plane on the runway, it sent an alert. But here's the lesson. A warning that nobody sees is just digital noise.
The system flashed a warning on the controller's display, but in that incredibly busy tower environment, it was missed. The post-crash investigation found that the controllers hadn't been fully trained on this specific alert, and there was no formal procedure for what to do when it went off. So the takeaway here is brutal. The tech worked, but the human process built around that tech was broken. The second hole in the cheese just lined up.
All right, so the Coast Guard crew made a fatal error. The tower missed the warning. That leaves one final chance to break this chain of events. The pilots on the flight deck of the approaching Japan Airlines A350.
From their point of view, it was a totally normal approach. Runway clear, weather good, but what they couldn't see was a dangerous illusion, one that was hiding an 85,000-pound obstacle right in their path. This is just a terrifying example of how multiple factors can conspire against you. First, the pilots were using their head-up displays. Now, this is a fantastic safety tool, but it can sometimes draw your focus inside the cockpit to the data instead of outside. At the exact same time, the Coast Guard plane's white lights were perfectly camouflaged against the sea of bright runway lights. It was a ghost hiding in plain sight. At this point, the collision was inevitable. 3 layers of sophisticated defense had utterly failed. But what happened in the seconds that followed? Well, that's why we're all here. This is where the story flips from a case study in failure to an absolute masterclass in human performance under fire. Think about the situation inside that cabin. A violent impact. The intercom system is completely dead. The plane is filling with thick, blinding smoke. And a raging inferno has made 5 of the 8 emergency exits totally useless.
So that's the problem. 379 terrified people plunged into darkness and chaos with just 3 usable exits. And this is where decades of training forged in the memory of a previous disaster, the 1985 crash of JAL Flight 123, took complete control.
See, this wasn't luck. This was culture. After the JAL 123 tragedy, the airline became obsessed with learning from failure. So when the systems went down, the crew didn't freeze. They didn't wait for instructions. They acted.
They assessed the doors, they used megaphones and their own voices to command, and they controlled the flow, screaming at people to leave their bags. And just as important, the passengers listened, which is a direct result of Japan Airlines' famously simple, clear, no-gimmick safety videos that people actually watch.
Okay, so how do we make sure a disaster like this never, ever happens again? Japan's authorities started plugging the holes in their system immediately, starting with the technology itself. The first fix is pretty straightforward. Make your warnings impossible to ignore. They're upgrading tower alerts with louder sounds, with more aggressive flashing colors. And on the ground, they're installing brighter stop bar lights. The goal is to create a bright red line so obvious that no one can miss it.
Of course, new tech is useless without a solid process behind it. For air traffic control, that means no more ambiguity. Readbacks have to be perfect, verbatim. But more importantly, controllers are now required to actively monitor the runways at all times. They have to be a constant human check on the system, not just a passive observer.
And finally, you have to invest in the people. They're adding more controllers to reduce that cognitive overload we talked about. And even better, they're creating a brand new position, a dedicated runway monitor whose only job is to watch for incursions. This isn't just about more eyes, it's about specialized, focused eyes. And in the cabin, they're updating training to officially empower crews to make those autonomous, life-saving decisions we saw in action.
You know, the Haneda collision is such a powerful reminder that even in the best systems, standards can slip, attention can drift, and human factors can defeat the most advanced technology. And that brings this whole investigation right back to your doorstep, and it leaves you with one final and very urgent question.
This has been a special report from the Human Error News Network. My final word to you is this: find the holes in your system before they find you.